talk with the estate and asset protection planning firm BarthCalderon. Thanks for jumping on. And this is a hot topic we're going to talk about. It's something that business owners rarely think about. So if you're in partnership with somebody else, you own a business together, whatever it is, whether it's rental real estate, an online business, whatever, you are exposed to the personal liabilities of your business partner, and your business can get attacked, and no business owner ever thinks about this. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk over and talk to my colleague Brian Chow, who's one of our estate and asset protection experts and attorneys. He's going to break it down for us. So let's go check it out. Okay, I'm here with my colleague Brian Chow, and so we're talking about this issue, business owners, you own a business together or rental property, and how business owners never think about this, where they're exposed to the liabilities, the personal liabilities of their business partner. Something happens to the spouse. So walk us through this, Brian, on how one owner is exposed to the liabilities of their business partner's personal liabilities. What's that all about?
Sure. So let's say that you have you're in partnership, right? So two guys get together and they form a widget factory, and a lot of times people put something together and everything, they're running things and everything runs smoothly, but what they don't consider is not only can the liabilities of each partner affect the business, but you're also potentially exposed to the liabilities of that partner's spouse. So
let me give you a scenario. Spouse crashes the car. She or he doesn't work in the business. What happens in that scenario, potentially?
Sure. So let's start with what most people do, right? So most people start by doing nothing. They haven't done any planning beforehand, and so we're here in California, so I'm going to talk specifically about California. So California is a community property state. So what that means is if you don't have a prenuptial agreement or you haven't come to some sort of agreement to the contrary, then when you become married, you essentially become one person. So we have husband and wife. They're two separate people, right? Husband makes money, it's his. Wife makes money, it's hers. Once they get married, they essentially become one person, right? So kind of like Ben Affleck and J-Lo, right? When they got together, they became Benefit, right? So it's one person.
That's a horrible name.
So once you become a single person, then everything that you acquire, that either spouse acquires during the course of that marriage, absent certain exceptions, is considered community property.
So like one big bucket.
One big bucket.
Okay.
So think of it like, right, you became one person and everything either spouse acquires is owned 100% by that person. A lot of times people assume that it means, I own things 50-50 with my spouse, but it doesn't. It means you own everything 100-100 with your spouse as one person. Okay? All right. It becomes 50-50 only in the event of a divorce. So in this situation, right, so husband and wife became one person, everything's now community property.
Right.
And wife gets into that car accident.
Right.
One of the features of community property is that it's exposed 100% to the liabilities of both spouses. So if that spouse gets into a car accident, it doesn't matter that the husband wasn't involved, right? The business owner husband, that liability extends to 100% of the assets that they own.
Meaning that she gets sued for the car accident, becomes a personal liability, and the husband owns a business, owns stock in the business. Mm-hmm. That stock can be attacked due to his spouse getting in a car accident.
That's right. Even if the spouse had nothing to do with the business at all.
It's a crazy thought.
Other than being married.
I guarantee you that business owners watching this don't think about this ever. That they could lose their business or half of it due to the liabilities of their spouse.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yep.
So what? So one of the things you go into, we won't go into detail now, but how do you guard against that scenario? Community property, business getting attacked. What would you do?
So one very simple thing to do, and again, this is kind of to underline the point that when you're about to start a business, it's good to consult with a knowledgeable attorney or knowledgeable accountants and resources that can help make sure this is all set up properly. But one thing that's important to consider is the structure of your company, right? So a lot of times when people form entities and businesses, oftentimes a popular choice is a corporation. And corporations are great and they've been around for a long time, and they do provide some level of asset protection through the form of what's called a corporate veil, right? If you have business liabilities, it'll keep those liabilities within the business from attaching to your personal assets.
Right.
But one of the drawbacks of a corporation is that if you have liability going the other way, right? We have a partner that gets in trouble personally and is getting sued.
So an outside liability coming into the business?
Right.
Yeah.
It's easy for the liability, for a partner's personal liability or an owner's personal liability to attach to the stock, right? So in this case, we have business owner who owns an S corp, right? That liability, that creditor can come in and take that business owner's share of the stock, right? Just like if I own 10 shares of Disney and I get sued, somebody gets a judgment against me, my creditor can now take my 10 shares of Disney.
Right.
They can now, right, collect the dividends, they can go to the shareholders meetings, they can exercise all the rights of ownership that I otherwise had because they now own that stock.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter that you don't own publicly traded stock. Stock gets attacked all the time.
That's right.
So in that scenario, you said, okay, the corporation, so then what would you look at to protect against the outside liability?
Sure. So one easy thing that many businesses can do, and I say many businesses because not all businesses, certain businesses have restrictions on what kind of entities they can be. Like for instance, doctors or lawyers, sometimes they can only be corporations or limited partnerships, right? Depending on what states you are.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because states don't want certain professions to have additional asset protection. Just because they say, hey, look, if you're a high-powered doctor or a lawyer, we don't want you to be able to use certain entities because if you screw up, we want you to be personally liable.
Right.
So,
but in this case, let's assume they can have, have the option. What would they do?
So one really easy and simple thing to do that most businesses can take advantage of is instead of incorporating as a corporation, to form an LLC. And LLCs are similar to corporations, except that they're designed to be more friendly for small businesses. And one of the key features of an LLC from an asset protection standpoint is we can do a lot more with an LLC to limit a creditor's remedies against an owner's interest in that LLC. So for instance, let's have that same situation where we have partners' creditors or partner spouses' creditors trying to attack his 50% interest membership interest in an LLC. In this case, if we structured it and maintained correctly, we can actually limit that creditor's remedy to what's called a charging order. So instead of the creditor coming in and being able to take the stock and now saying, ha ha ha, I own 50% of the company, I can block the other partner from making any decisions, I have access to the books and records, I can compel distributions, I can make things very difficult for this partner to operate. What we're able to do instead is say, no, you don't get to do any of that, right? If you get a judgment against this 50% owner, the only thing you can get as the creditor is the right to that owner's share of any distributions that come out of the LLC.
Ah, okay. All right.
So they can't compel distributions, they can't participate in the management of the business, they can't foreclose on any of the underlying assets. The only thing they can do is sit on the outside waiting for a distribution. So let's say the LLC chooses...
Well, I'm going to say something real quick.
Sure.
I think this is a good thing, right?
Yep. This is a good
This
thing.
is a good thing.
So if the business chooses to, let's say, distribute $1,000, right? $1,000 goes to the non-debtor partner.
Yeah.
The other, or $500,000 goes to that partner. The other $500 goes to the debtor partner's creditors, right?
Okay.
And so, but because the creditor can't compel a distribution, right? What do they want? They typically want money and they want it yesterday. And so if they can't compel that distribution, what it does is it drives them towards the bargaining table to negotiate a settlement for a lot less money, a lot less time.
Hopefully pennies on the dollar, right? Yeah.
Pennies on the dollar.
Okay, so that's the conversion from corporation to an LLC, protecting against outside liability. You mentioned something off camera about the post-nuptial separate property agreement, which would help in this scenario too.
Yes.
So briefly, tell us what that.
Sure. So prenups and postnups. One cool thing about the law is that spouses can freely contract between one another as to how they want to hold title to the various assets that they have. And so, so a lot of times when people get married, what they'll consider is a prenuptial agreement, but many of our clients come to us after they've gotten married, right?
Right.
So that train has already left the station. So, but a postnuptial agreement isn't necessarily, oftentimes clients and spouses assume that it's a divorce planning tool, that they're saying, hey, we don't want to even think about that because we're opening the door to us potentially getting divorced.
Yeah.
But that's not really what this is. What a post-nuptial agreement, at least the way that our firm utilizes it, is really a way for us to strengthen the marriage by making it harder for creditors to come after those assets.
Right.
If you think about why most marriages fail, it's usually because of money, right? So the more we can protect those assets, the stronger the marriage can conceivably be. So again, going to this whole idea about community property, right? If we own everything as benefer or as husband and wife, as one person, then again, liability of each spouse can attach to 100% of those assets. What if instead we said, hey, husband and wife agree to hold their assets as if they were not residents of California, right?
Separate.
Separate.
Okay.
So they say, look, instead of us owning everything as if we lived in a community property state like California or Texas or Nevada, we choose to hold our assets as if we lived in a common law state like New York or Massachusetts or Georgia, right?
Yeah.
And so instead of owning everything as 100-100, they instead say, okay, everything that we previously owned as community property, we're going to divide in half. Husband, you're going to own an undivided 50% interest. Wife, you're going to own an undivided 50% interest. Furthermore, all of our future liabilities are going to be our own, right? So if I get into a car accident, that's my liability. If my spouse gets into a car accident, that's her liability. So now if she gets into a car accident, right, it's just her liability, and her liability can only attach to her 50% interest.
Huge deal.
Right.
Huge deal.
So in this case, again, we're limiting her ability, or her creditor's ability, to only come after her 50% of the assets. Furthermore, if we have this business interest in that LLC, right, her interest can only attach to her 25% interest in the business rather than 50.
Got it.
Right, and it would still be limited to that charging order protection that we were talking about.
So there's a lot of nuance here, as you can tell, and you know, Brian, you could probably go on for another hour on this subject, but the key here, my takeaway, is that if you're in business with somebody else, or partnership, you got to understand how you are exposed to your business partner's liability and how to protect yourself. You think that's a good takeaway?
That is a good takeaway. And just briefly, another important way, or cool way that business partners will protect those assets too, is they'll put together a buy-sell agreement.
Right.
And that's another way that you can kind of build in. You can think of it almost like a succession plan or a estate plan for the business, right? If something unexpected happens to one of the partners, right, they die, they become incapacitated, or they're going through a divorce, or they have creditor issues, it can build in certain provisions whereby the business can buy out their shares at a reduced price as a way to protect the business from the liabilities of each partner, or furthermore, the liabilities of each partner's spouse.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. All right. Thanks everyone for joining, and see you next time.